What's going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at and whenever you're watching this. Today we're going to be jumping into some Warhammer 40K content with Space Marine 2 just around the corner, about to come out. I believe I'm going to have this video set to go on the day of its release, Monday the 9th. I saw that Luton09 had a Space Marine lore deep dive on the main character Titus of the Space Marine series. I have not played Space Marine 1 yet. I plan to do that before Space Marine 2 comes out over this weekend, so hopefully you guys have checked out that stream, because I intend to stream it. But anyway, yeah, it's one I wanted to jump into and take a look at here today. So we're going to look at Space Marine 2 Titus lore deep dive, Warhammer 40,000 lore history by Luton09. Links will be down below, as always, in the description, info section, whatever you want to call it, to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to Luton's channel. Please do me a favor, click those links. If you enjoyed this video, go over there and give it a like. And if you enjoy Luton's content, please do me a favor of hitting that sub button on his channel. If you're not subbed to him already, he makes a lot of amazing long format content for the Warhammer 40K universe. He's one of my favorite Warhammer 40K channels, so I would definitely recommend going over and checking him out if you are interested in Warhammer 40K content. If you'd like to join us when we do these reactions live, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. If you do me a favor, just check those out, see if any of them have any kind of interest for you. If you decide you want to take your support to the channel to the next level, if you've been around for a while and you enjoy the content, it's a great way to support me, so that I can continue making this content that you guys are enjoying. You can get early access videos, priority, and any kind of requests you might have for me to do reactions. There is a members Discord channel, even though the Discord is open to everyone if you decide you would like to join the Discord. But yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate you guys. And I guess let's just get in the video. Again, Space Marine 2 Titus lore deep dive, Warhammer 40K lore history by Luton09. Bada boom, bada bing. Luton. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only Hua. I'm so hyped for Space Marine 2.
Of hero, inspire where you can, but remember always that we are the angels of death, not of mercy or salvation.
That's a hell of a quote. I'm super hyped in this game. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to playing through my first Space Marine. I'm looking forward for my Space Marine 1 game. I saw yesterday, I think it's been 13 years since the first Space Marine game was released. I believe it's a PS3 era game, so it's like, god damn. But yeah, I'm looking forward to I'm super hyped for this game. And I hope the multiplayer, both co-op and PvP, gives me some stuff to grind.
Be a Space Marine, a member of the Adeptus Astartes. To exist as such an individual is to number yourself among the most elite warriors humanity can bring to bear in the dark era of the 41st millennium, where human existence stands, as it has for thousands of years, on the precipice of total annihilation from both invasive, innumerable enemies and the corrupting forces that emerge from within human civilization itself. The Imperium of Mankind is the galactic-spanning civilization of humanity in M41. With such a vast empire, mankind can bring considerable forces to bear in the defense of its imposing territory. The bulk of this forms the hundreds of billions of regular humans who join the renowned military force known as the Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum. There are other factions as well. The zealous members of the Adeptus Sororitas, for example, smaller in number, but carrying with them the ever-burning wrath of the Emperor of Man. There are also those known as Mechanicus.
Man's got King Ghidorah down here on his feet, dude.
The tech priests of Mars, who can deploy their own armies alongside the immense ancient war machines known as Titans. The Imperium itself contains many more specific forces.
I could only imagine what it would be like to pilot a Titan, man. Like, I don't know, I just feel like that would be an experience that would be almost undescribable.
And sub-factions that it can bring to the battlefields of the distant future. but none can even begin to approach the legendary reputation of those warriors known as the Astartes. They were created in the earliest days of the emergent Imperium as the Emperor of Mankind unified the tattered remnants of what had once been humanity during its zenith period of the Golden Age, known in the contemporary era as the Dark Age of technology.
Yep.
By the time the Emperor was a known figure, those days of glorious unity had disintegrated into a total collapse of human civilization. This was brought about largely due to galactic war and subsequent isolation. The Emperor of Mankind emerged in this time to reunite and lead humanity as the most powerful being ever to call themselves human. A figure of godlike ability, able to draw strength and power from the warp, also known as the Immaterium. This is a parallel realm to our material reality, and whilst the Emperor does draw power from the warp, his interaction with it is on an entirely different scale than that of the ordinary psychic users. For he harnesses the warp's energy with a level of mastery which borders on the divine, and without any risk of corruption. This power imbues...
I think that's the thing that is very underspoken, is the fact that he's able to utilize the essence of the warp, but he is uncorruptible by the warp and the chaos gods and the denizens of chaos. That's something that I feel like is very understated, because like even Magnus, obviously, who was the only other human-born psyker, I guess you could say, that was somewhat close to the level, you want to say close to the level of psyker that the Emperor was, and obviously he fell to the corruption of chaos. So I just feel like that's kind of an understated fact.
Him with a psychic strength of near unseen capability. His exact origins, life journey, and overall intentions, though, remain something of endless speculation, and remain shrouded in the mists of time. This is something that I have speculated and discussed upon greatly in other videos, but most see him as a benevolent figure who saved humanity from complete annihilation, and in the successful wake of the reunification, launched his great crusade to reunite all humanity throughout the galaxy and form the Imperium of Man. The tool he would deploy to enable this grandiose vision? The Space Marines. To be an Astartes, though, is to live a life wholly disconnected from the rest of humanity. For while they may technically still qualify as human, they are in the most significant ways distinctly separated from what we would consider as such.
You could basically say that Space Marines kind of lose their humanity as they go through this, because they essentially are something different altogether.
Undergo a grueling transformation process after selection to become Space Marine aspirants at an early age. Many will not survive the physically extreme overhaul, which will see them transition from base humans to genetically engineered warriors, stronger, faster, the elite of the elite.
Yep.
Their chapters, such as the Ultramarines, Blood Angels, Black Templars, and Imperial Fists, only contain 1,000 battle brothers at any given time. When they are called upon to deploy to a conflict zone, it is often in small numbers to bolster or support a far larger existing planetary force, or to supplement a task force within a specific system. Space Marines only appear in large army-scale forces whilst on a crusade, such as the ongoing Indomitus Crusade, launched in the contemporary period of the Imperium. But there are of course always exceptions and times where a critical mass of Space Marines from a single chapter may be deployed. But by and large, smaller deployments are typical for the Astartes, such as we saw with Titus and how he was deployed to Graia during the invasion of the Orcs and the later Chaos incursions. The Astartes numbered but a few, but were still able to turn the tide of that conflict. This is because Space Marines are able to operate in small numbers by their physical adaptations and the supporting hardware available to them. For an Astartes can remain operational for days at a time without requiring any sustenance, they can go without sleep, and maintain a level of undiminished focus whilst operational. So advanced and significant are the changes in the physiology of an Astartes, they can even operate underwater or in the vacuum of space for short periods of time. Their body can rapidly heal small wounds, seal more significant injuries, seeing them able to fight on even should they suffer traumatic physical damage that would be terminal in ordinary humans. But all of their physical augmentations are supported by some of the heaviest personal armor available to humans.
That also enhances their speed, strength, etc.
Consists of ceramite plating locked onto the frame of an Astartes to form a fully enclosed suit. This is then articulated with dense fiber bundles and servos that not only enable the wearer to move, but significantly increase their strength. And while non-Astartes such as Sororitas or Inquisitors may be seen to wear variations of power armor, but these are specially scaled and adapted to enable those users to move with a level of dexterity, because power armor is very large and very bulky. Astartes, though, are gifted with an augmentation that only they are capable of enduring, known as the Black Carapace. This sits below their skin and is a critical augmentation to enable them to interface with power armor.
Yeah, it essentially integrates their nervous system to power armor.
Body. In the development of the Space Marines, this Black Carapace is known to have been one of the most difficult augmentations to develop and implement, and was in fact nearly written off. Eventually, though, it was successful and enabled the Space Marines to move and fight in their power armor as if they were not wearing it at all. And this is one of the major differences which separates Space Marines and unaugmented humans, for which trying to wear this kind of power armor and move with any reasonable dexterity would be all but impossible. And while all of these adaptations are undoubtedly impressive and enable each Astartes to be effectively a walking tank, able to utilize a vast arsenal of weapons and tools to reach their maximum potential at all times, there is a significant price to pay. For while they may live lives far beyond the span of an ordinary human and remain untouched by all but the very worst plagues and diseases, to deploy with a strength of force and focus and wield the tactics to devastate and overwhelm the very worst enemies of mankind, bolstered by the machines of war to ensure that few if any could stand against them, the cost for all of this remains their humanity. Space Marines undoubtedly consider themselves part of human civilization. Many are known for their great ability to philosophize, craft masterworks of art, or spend centuries perfecting their martial skills. Yet, it remains impossible to ignore the fact that they are gigantic superhuman warriors who spend minimal time in any activity that one would consider part of humanity. Given that Astartes spend their days battling among the worst theatres of war imaginable, the most visible role they take on, which brings them into contact with ordinary humans, is in the role of custodians or overseers of their territory and planets. For example, within the realm of Ultramar, home to the Ultramarines.
I knew it was going to go with the Ultramarines.
The vast territory here is divided into 5 sectors, each overseen by a ruling Astartes tetrarch. These overseers generally help guide and marshal the human governors and various administrative bodies who maintain a cohesive and stable authority. They may also appear on scouting missions or in an advisory capacity to ongoing campaigns, but this is largely the limit of their involvement with most mortal humans' day-to-day activities. Because while they may be seen as the saviors of humanity, the angels of death, the ultimate defenders who know no fear, and remain the Emperor's bulwark against the terror, Space Marines are truly monstrous. This is the exploration of character we see in figures like Demetrain Titus, because to know and understand how a Space Marine operates, to live your life with only one certainty, that you will die in service to the Emperor of mankind. And
I mean, it's true. Like, granted, as a Space Marine 2, one of the things that he hasn't mentioned is they also, essentially, their emotional system is augmented as well. They don't understand fear as we do. They don't process it as we do. So that in and of itself, you know, begs the question of, you know, humanity, etc. I had another point and then my brain went elsewhere with what I was saying. And now I lost what I was going to say. So I guess we'll continue. And if I remember, I will speak on it again. Let me rewind real quick and see if I remember here.
Space Marines are truly monstrous. This is the exploration of character we see it in figures like Demetrain Titus, because to know and understand how a Space Marine operates, to live your life with only one certainty...
Oh yeah, that's what the point was. So like, as a Space Marine, you understand that you are a tool of war and that you will die in battle. Like, more than likely. The chances of you living to old age and dying to old age are astronomically slim because of how long you live and because your purpose is literally to fight the enemies of the Imperium. So, like, that is a reality that all Space Marines understand, but because they don't have the same sense of emotional, like, fear, I guess, as we do, I think it's something that, you know, they just accept, you know, like, I'm not a soldier. I've never been a soldier. You know, I've never seen war, but I would think that even the most hardened soldier, you know, understands that. I don't know. What's the point I'm trying to make here, I guess? I guess it's the idea of, I think, not that Astartes don't want to die, you know, kind of situation. They're just okay with it because of them dying in the service of the Imperium. And I think there's also, you know, plenty of soldiers in, you know, real life that have accepted that too. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is there's always still kind of a sense of fear and reluctance, no matter how, you know, how many times you've gone to war, et cetera, that this could be your last. And I wonder if it's a situation with the Space Marines where, like, that's something that they don't really even care about. Maybe even some look forward to it, you know, to die in the service of the Imperium, you know, like the Space Wolves. They're very Viking-esque. So, you know, I would assume for them, there could be no higher honor than to die, you know, in battle kind of a situation. So anyway, I don't know. Let's just continue.
That you will die in service to the Emperor of mankind underscores the fact that for Astartes, their existence is for one purpose and one purpose only.
Yep.
War. I will just note that from this point on, there are no major spoilers for the game of Space Marine 2 itself, but I obviously will be discussing in detail existing lore around Titus. This includes some of the small observations from previews and speculative discussion adjacent to the character of Titus. All this includes some known aspects and entities of the Space Marine 2 game that have been revealed to us officially so far.
Gotcha.
So for any and all who wish to go into the game clean, this is your full warning.
Okay, so
for those who want
minor spoilers ahead, essentially, is what this sounds like.
A more solid underpinning of Titus, we continue on. While many Space Marines will see their service recorded from inception to their inevitable demise, others lead more fragmented, twisting personal histories that sometimes will even see them set apart from their brothers within the chapter. Very often, this may be due to some event or dishonourable conduct that may or may not have been within their own control. Nonetheless, the responsibility always lands with the individual Marine, and all must face the weight that comes with being an Astartes of the Emperor's Imperium. A Space Marine who is found to have slipped or otherwise lacking within any key aspect of their duty may be temporarily sent to atone for their shortcomings, and this could mean assignment to a troubled backwater world, administrative duty, overcoming a personal flaw through the completion of a challenging mission or historically chapter-appropriate quest, or some other miscellaneous area of service.
Aren't these things in their foreheads supposed to kind of be like a symbol of like achievements? Thing, almost like, what's the word I'm looking for? Not badges. It's not like a badge of honor kind of thing, although I guess it could be interpreted that way. I don't know. The word that I'm trying to think of is escaping me, but symbols that they've achieved great things. Medals of honor. I think that's the word I was kind of looking. Kind of like, you know, a medal of honor kind of situation for some kind of great achievement that they did in battle in the service of the Imperium.
In the most severe scenarios where one's faith or loyalty are questioned, they may even face interrogation by chaplains or even the Inquisition. There would exist no standardized period for this to take place over either, and it could mean months, years, even centuries of isolation, with the testing of an individual's character and spirit by the most extreme means. This was the reality that Demetrain Titus would face in the aftermath of the events upon Graia. This would mark a dark chapter in his own personal history that even now remains largely shrouded in secrecy. Titus was born upon the agri-world of Tarantus, which sits within the realm known as Ultramar. This region of the galaxy has been defended and governed by the Ultramarines since before the heresy. Tarantus is part of a tri-system group known as the Three Planets, along with Quintan and Massili. The system and Tarantus have not existed though in calm isolation, having seen invasions by both Orc and Demons of the Warp, but given their status as part of Ultramar, both were purged and retained as key worlds within the domain of the Ultramarines. The planet itself is characterized by an arid environment, its inhabitants deploying extensive water traps to extract moisture from the dry landscape. Within its vast domed cities,
water farmers
designed to maintain a more productive
little Star Wars action
they enable
here,
the populace to produce large quantities of food which are then shipped off-world and support other planets and systems within Ultramar. Titus was an only child from a modest family, but selected as a prospective candidate for the Astartes by selectors of the Ultramarines, a great honour in and of itself. Space Marine chapters may choose candidates for potential conversion from all manner of worlds and personal backgrounds, some even from lives as criminals before entering the trials to become an Astartes. There is almost no restriction on where a chapter may draw its candidates from, and
I feel like for the most part, dude, you know, from what I know of what the majority of lives are like in the 40K universe under the Imperium, it almost feels like it would be for most people with how their lives live out. It would be like it would be beyond an honor to be selected for a candidate to the Space Marines. Like, it would almost be a blessing, because if you succeed and you pass the trials and everything and become an actual Space Marine, you know, you are able to serve a higher purpose. You know, you would have, you know, a higher sense of duty and purpose, and you would, I don't know, for me personally, like, if you're not born under nobility in the Imperium or on, is it a luxury planet? I forget what the terminology is used, but essentially on like preserved planets where things are actually nice, then essentially you are just a cog in a wheel and you're another worker, and it's going to be very difficult. Like, life is just going to be very harsh and very difficult, and you're probably going to die young because of shitty conditions or, you know, poisoning or whatever from whatever work you're going to have to do. And that's all you're ever going to have to hope for. At least as a Space Marine, you know, even though you are essentially going to be a tool of war and you're going to, you know, die essentially more than likely a grisly death, at least you can go out in the universe and experience things, you know what I mean? You can see different things. Now, I guess that in and of itself, in the 40K universe, could be taken as both a blessing and a curse, because there's some crazy shit out there, dude, you know? Denizens of chaos and whatever else, but I don't know. I feel like, for me personally, if I lived in the 40K universe and I wasn't born into some kind of nobility or higher status family, and I was just another Joe Schmo worker, like, I would definitely, you know, want to be accepted, or at least, you know, want to try to become a Space Marine. Also, not to mention the fact that in general, you know, the public eye of what a Space Marine is they're essentially considered, you know, mythological super beings, almost gods themselves, you know? So being selected to become one would be like one of the greatest honors you could have.
Each chapter will be looking for specific criteria to meet their needs. After his successful induction and conversion to becoming an Astartes, Titus proved to be a formidable member of the Ultramarines, and within a mere 50 years had already risen through the ranks to become a decorated member of the renowned Second Company. Unfortunately, when the legendary battle for Macragge took place, which saw the Xenos known as the Tyranids bring the Ultramarines' homeworld to its knees, Titus was serving far from Macragge, and as the conflict raged, astropathic distress signals had been sent, but few were able to breach the smothering psychic wall produced by the Tyranids known as the Shadow in the Warp.
I still find that fascinating that they're able to do that.
Out into the galaxy, and many deployed companies and strike teams of the Ultramarines raced to return and aid in the defense of their Primarch's world and Ultramar itself. Titus and the Second Company would arrive too late to directly defend against the invasion, but their numbers were critical in scouring all remaining Xenos from the surface of Macragge and the other worlds that were already being assaulted by splinters of the nightmare creatures from Hive Fleet Behemoth. In the aftermath of this infamous battle, the Ultramarines' veteran First Company had been all but annihilated, and the chapter itself had to be substantially rebuilt. The then Second Company Captain Severus was promoted to the First Company, which then saw Lucian Trajan as the new Second Company Captain. His command squad sergeant was none other than Demetrain Titus himself.
Gotcha.
It would be in this period that Titus would learn how to most effectively deal with the Tyranid menace, as he and the Second Company were deployed in numerous operations to remove.
So obviously that knowledge would seem to be, you know, something that's going to be handy in what's going to happen in Space Marine 2, I would assume.
The remaining splinters of that Xenos from across the many worlds of Ultramar. And what Titus learned from these deployments was the critical need to assess an enemy first-hand. And while some commanders may be content to sit aboard the bridge of a ship and assess incoming data to formulate a strategy, Titus found that personal experience and on-the-ground engagement was considerably more effective in creating a successful strategy. Captain Trajan and Titus would stand together against the enemies of humanity for nearly a century, until fate would determine a new path for Titus. The Xenos known to humanity as the Eldari or Eldar invaded an Imperial world, Beta Arcturus. And as is often the case for a Xenos known to have inhabited the galaxy millions of years before humanity emerged, this planet was once considered part of their own empire. But unlike so many of the horrors that face the Imperium, the Eldar are sometimes more civilized by degrees, and so the humans were given an ultimatum.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that. I guess it depends on what your definition is. And I guess it also depends, like, he's talking about just the regular Eldar. He's not talking about the Drakari, you know, et cetera, because then there's obviously a difference between them.
Evacuate immediately within 9 hours, or face their war host. Over a week later, as the Ultramarines' Second Company, led by Trajan, arrived, they found a world ablaze. The Eldar of Craftworld Bieltan had laid waste to the Imperial cities, and the Astartes set about redressing the balance immediately. Drop pods and Thunderhawks rained down upon the world, and soon after, Trajan was already facing the Eldar commander, their autarch, in single combat. He would slay the Xenos leader, with Titus leading the command squad, carving a path through their aspect warriors who had formed a bodyguard contingent. Yet the Eldari had, in the chaos of battle, captured one of the Astartes, a battle brother of Titus, Leandros. Trajan led a squad to recover him, but as is typical of the Eldari, it was a ploy to lure the Astartes into an ambush, something that any Space Marine would entirely expect, but the numbers not committed to the battlefield surrounded Trajan and in short order cut him down. Titus and the strike force would recover Trajan's body and purge the remaining Xenos from the world, but the cost of victory had been considerably higher than any would have expected. Chapter Master Calgar would in the aftermath assign the regrettably vacant position of company captain to Titus.
Okay, so
by
that's
the time
how he gets promoted.
began to invade,
and I mean, that's pretty much how Space Marines have to get promoted. Again, because of how long-lived they are, there's few opportunities for promotion and rising in the ranks until a superior is killed in some way, shape, or form.
Invade the Forge world of Graia. Titus,
or they do something, you know, which would be almost unquestionable or unthinkable, you know, um, dereliction of duty, things of that kind of nature, which I think, as far as I know, there aren't a whole lot of situations where a Space Marine does something like that warrants demotion. But I'm sure it has probably happened.
had already been captain of the second company for a decade and led an exemplary record against all enemies of the Imperium. Yet within Titus, there existed a personal trait that would lead him down a path few could have expected for one with such a service history, for Titus had always been one to lead a little too strongly. He did not show restraint where others may have, and more importantly, did not always demonstrate enough self-reflection. For even among the Astartes, they are more than capable of displaying all too human flaws, as was evidenced throughout the heresy. But this is the entire purpose of the Codex Astartes, to provide structure, answers, and a set of principles to generally abide by. Upon Graia, Titus came into contact with a power source that demonstrated he held an unusual resistance to warp power.
That's right. I think I remember hearing that at some point in time, that he somehow is unusually resistant to warp power. And so then a lot of people started suspecting that he was tainted by chaos because of that. And since then, everyone's kind of kept an eye on him and kept him at arm's length. Anyway.
Immediately raised suspicions among his battle brothers, including Leandros. Yet rather than heed their concerns, Titus believed only he was capable of completing the task at hand. This would lead to his eventual detention and interrogation by the Inquisition. Yet, his discipline as an Ultramarine would in the long term prove to be his salvation. For Titus had willingly surrendered himself to Inquisitor Thrax on Graia without resistance or excessive protestation. Despite the outraged calls from his companions, Titus recognized the Inquisitor's authority over all Imperial subjects, and despite being adamant that he was no heretic and had not strayed from the teachings of his chapter, Primarch and Emperor, to have turned against an Inquisitor would have been an effective death sentence and admission of guilt in the eyes of those who suspected
in that kind of situation, what else are you going to do?
Unwitting warp corruption.
The only real option you have is to surrender and go through the process.
Titus would now be forced to endure the ultimate dishonor and humiliation, but fate had determined his path. In the fullness of time, his experiences would forever alter his view of Inquisitors, and understandably so. But any freedom to exercise those views would not present itself for a considerable amount of time. This is where Titus disappeared out of sight and record, leaving the second company of the Ultramarines without a commander. This was when Cato Sicarius, the now legendary captain of the second company, would be assigned that position. Titus, though, would spend over a century being assessed and interrogated by the Inquisition, spending large periods of that time in stasis.
Over a century.
While the details are omitted, such interrogations are known to be brutal in both physical and psychic punishments upon an individual. To break them down, learn all that an Inquisitor can about whatever threat and, if possible, what knowledge one may have toward the forces that could be manipulating them. For the forces of chaos and the warp work in very strange ways, and it's common for an individual to not even realize that they may have been manipulated by the dark entities of the warp. Those who dwell within darkness do not recognize the timescales of mortals either, and so a plan could be seeded by those of the warp decades, even centuries in advance. These would be aspects of Titus's proximity to the warp powers and chaos beings upon Graia that the Inquisition wished to establish. The detention of Titus came at the protestations of Marneus Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines.
Okay.
Titus would not be released, and in fact was never released. He only emerged from the depths of confinement due to the ironic possession of the Inquisitor who had detained him. For during the purging of a corrupted Astartes...
That's interesting. So the Inquisitor who detained him became possessed and released him. That's fascinating. I wonder if that was like part of a chaos thing to try to, for whatever reason, paint Titus as being more corrupted and it backfired or something. I don't know. I guess let's see what happens.
Chapter, Inquisitor Thrax himself was possessed by a demon of the warp. This saw him immediately executed by the Grey Knights, who were conveniently alongside him during that deployment. And this of course left Titus and many others that had been detained by Thrax in something of a limbo state.
Yeah.
They would not be released until a team of Astartes from the Red Hunters.
I mean, that would kind of have to suck, right? Because it would almost be a situation where you would think things would have to start over. Like, how long would they be able to determine how long this Inquisitor was possessed? Was he possessed the whole time? Would his interrogation of everything up till then have to be thrown out and then restarted? You know what I mean? And that's, I guess, already a century's worth of work that's gone through before this had happened, potentially. So, like, damn, that would suck.
Chapter were dispatched to investigate this inquisitorial outpost, to which they soon discovered numerous Space Marines imprisoned within. All were held in stasis and so were not subject to the passage of time, for this is often the case when dealing with long open periods of interrogation and assessment. The Inquisitor leading the team of Astartes to assess the holdings of Inquisitor Thrax did not call for the immediate destruction of all Astartes held here, which they very well could have done. Instead, they were to be passed on to the Death Watch in the fortress of Watcher Keep for further evaluation.
Okay.
Like so many Astartes before him, Titus now entered a period of effective penance within the Death Watch. The Death Watch are a highly specialized chapter of Space Marines who do not follow the template of most others, yet they're still loyal to the Imperium and the Emperor, for they are seen to be tasked with the most dangerous alien threats to the Imperium, and unlike other chapters, consist of generally veteran warriors from innumerable Space Marine chapters all throughout the Imperium. They are located in these so-called Watch Fortresses, which are spread all across the galaxy, and from here they stand ready to strike against any calls from the Inquisition or to respond to immediate Xenos incursions which might threaten humanity. These warriors are called to serve in the Death Watch in what is known as the Long Vigil. Often this will be for veteran Astartes who have demonstrated considerable skill and acumen in service and will be inducted for what is officially a limited period of time, after which they may return to their original chapter.
Okay.
In actuality,
They essentially get assigned to the Death Watch. It's almost kind of, I don't want to say a death sentence, but it kind of is. It's almost like a situation of, okay, you get to be assigned to this chapter of Astartes. They're going to be going on the most dangerous missions. And if you survive and prove yourself still loyal, then after a certain period of going through this, you can then return to your original chapter, you know, etc., and go about what you were doing beforehand.
most will never see their chapter again.
Right.
Few, if any, though, would decline such an assignment, for to join the Death Watch is considered a great honor and a solemn duty.
Well, and it sounds like, too, that because they are a mix of what sounds like, I don't know if it's necessarily the most elite, but they are, it sounds like a mix of some of the most, at least some of the most experienced Astartes, from what he's said, that, like, I don't know. It's almost like they almost sound like they would be like the best of the best kind of a situation. They might, you know, they're a mixed group from all chapters put together with all different kinds of specialties. They have vast amounts of experience between them, lived through and fought through how many campaigns, and for whatever reason or another, they've been punished in some kind of way and then brought together. And so you essentially have potentially the most experienced group of Astartes going out to do the most dangerous missions. So it's like, that almost seems like a real logical course of action, right? It almost seems like they would be kind of like, I don't know. it seems like it would just be something that would be more than like just a punishment, I guess is what I'm trying to get at, right? Like, they obviously, as he's saying, it's considered an honor to go fight for and with the Death Watch and go through this penance, but like, is it really a punishment, I guess is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like, you have the most dangerous missions, and you have the most experienced groups of Astartes from various backgrounds and chapters put to task on this. So like, that just seems like it would be the logical case to do. You know what I mean? I guess is kind of the point that I'm going at. And it seems like it's not really as much of a punishment. But I guess because you're taken from your actual born chapters to go and do this, and it's seen again as a type of penance for some kind of wrongdoing that you've done. And I could see why it's considered an honor, because you're getting a chance to serve again, and it's again with potentially some of the best, if not the best, Space Marines there are. And you're given a chance to essentially clear your name so that you can return. But I don't know, it just seems like this would be something. It just seems like it wouldn't be really a punishment to me. It seems only logical to me that in certain situations where extreme, you know, enemy battles, whatever you want to call them, are going to come up, that you would want to take a mix of the best from different units to have to deal, that are like specialized in them. You know, people who have like Titus, for example, who apparently has a specialty in dealing with Tyranids and really kind of understands how to combat them from his experience in the past. You know, he would be a great candidate along with others to be mixed together in this elite squad to deal with Tyranids. You know what I'm saying? It just sounds like this would be something that would be logical to be done anyway, and not necessarily seen as some kind of punishment, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. But anyway, let's continue.
For they are the elite Xenos hunting wing of the Inquisition's Ordo Xenos, long-serving Marines who have demonstrated outstanding prowess, strategic insight, or have had significant encounters with specific alien species, are often chosen to bolster the effectiveness of Deathwatch kill teams. Service in the Deathwatch also allows Astartes to share and acquire valuable knowledge and tactics from the brothers of other chapters, fostering inter-chapter cooperation and strengthening the Imperium's overall defense. For those who do return to their chapter, the experience gained during this tenure enhances not only the individual's capabilities, but also benefit their chapter upon their return, bringing with them advanced and up-to-date combat techniques, as well as strategic intelligence critical for future engagements with said Xenos forces. Yet there is another role that can see one inducted into the Deathwatch: the Penitent. This is a Marine serving penance in the Deathwatch that could have been demanded by their leadership within the chapter, but it could also be voluntary. For, say, a chapter that fell to chaos, but as was seen in the Heresy itself, not all members of a legion nor chapter automatically are corrupted. Some who remain loyal may then choose to serve in.
Yeah, there were some Space Marine chapters, legions, whatever, that fell to chaos, but not everyone in those legions actually became disloyal and followed them. Some broke away, and some loyalists of them survived and were essentially then leaderless, I guess is the word, but they didn't have, you know, a legion chapter, you know, whatever to fight for. So I could see them then kind of being thrown into this thing that became the Deathwatch.
In the Deathwatch in shame, if accepted as a form of penance. These Marines are most usually designated as an anonymous Marine known as a Black Shield. They're seen to bear no chapter mark, with their right armor pauldron displaying only featureless black or the silver skull of the Deathwatch. This ancient tradition emerged during the Heresy, and it was a means by which a Space Marine from a disgraced legion could continue to serve on, fighting against the traitors. So it is in the contemporary Imperium that an Astartes with heraldry obscured may present himself before a watch commander and petition for admittance to the Deathwatch. He may not be questioned nor pressed to divulge anything about his origins, all such information having been ritually obliterated by the removal of his chapter's mark. To exist within the Death Watch as a Black Shield is no easy path, for most will avoid the company of other Astartes, remaining in self-imposed solitary isolation until the time of battle is upon them. It was to this reality that Titus now found himself faced.
I feel like wouldn't that be a bad thing anyway? Because, like, look, even amongst the Astartes, you have to have some kind of semblance of, like, trust and camaraderie in the understanding that the person you're fighting with in any kind of battle is going to have your back in any kind of situation. And if you isolate yourself, then how are other people going to trust you, you know, when it comes time to fight, even if you are an Astartes? Like, they don't know necessarily how you fight. Are you going to follow their orders, etc., you know?
With little, if any, hope of being admitted back into the Ultramarines. Titus had been entirely isolated since his detention upon Graia by Inquisitor Thrax, and so as far as he was aware, such a significant period of time had elapsed that he now believed, in the eyes of his brothers, he had been effectively subjected to censure and would never return. Of course, unknown to Titus, the reality was entirely the opposite. Titus would fight on. He would not abandon service to the Imperium and the Emperor, for as the famous Imperial quotation states, only in death does duty end.
Yep.
Of course, on the other hand, it was the Ultramarines Primarch Rabute Gilliman himself who said of that quote, "Only in death does duty end, is no way to live." Unfortunately for Titus, this was the way by which he would live from here on. Yet he held no more of a personal desire to claim glory in the eyes of others than he had during his service in the Ultramarines, and while that may have been true, it did not necessarily mean that he'd always followed the path as laid out within the Codex Astartes. Titus chose a new name for himself while serving in the Death Watch, Nullus, and fully embraced his new identity as an anonymous Black Shield. He served as now merely a tool of the Emperor. He existed devoid of personality and brotherhood that he had known through all his years in the chapter. Now he was devoted fully to destroying the very worst enemies facing humanity until he would meet his eventual inevitable demise. During the Fourth Tyrannic War, which saw the greatly feared Tyranid threat re-emerge in Segmentum Pacificus and would see Hive Fleet Leviathan launch a devastating invasion both here and into the Imperium's most critical Segmentum Solar, the Tyranids were soon observed to be significantly problematic, having adapted their tactics and evolved new bioforms to overwhelm Imperial defences. The conflict saw the involvement of various Space Marine chapters, Astra Militarum regiments and other Imperial forces, and one of the key aspects of this war was the unprecedented level of coordination between Imperial forces, including joint operations and the use of advanced strategies to counter the Tyranid swarm, something which was in small part due to the deployment of teams such as the Death Watch, who had early on been called to engage against this new threat, and after all, who had significant experience in fighting these particular Xenos.
That's what I was saying earlier.
Proved entirely necessary, as many among humanity's defenders in the region had no real comprehension of the foe they faced. At this time, most recorded assaults from the Tyranids had originated on the far side of the Imperium's eastern galactic region, and so those here in Pacificus and Solar were entirely inexperienced. While deploying into the Residius system to reinforce Imperial Guard forces, Titus and their Corvus Blackstar was downed by flying Tyranid bioforms. Those who survived found themselves facing the horrifying numbers of aliens upon the surface. Titus would be...
I've said it before, and I've said it a million times, man. I can't wait till we actually get like a good 40K movie, show, whatever. Like Starship Troopers, man. Can't we just do Starship Troopers, but in Warhammer 40K? Can't we just do that? The bugs are the Tyranids, and, you know, the Starship Troopers are the Space Marines. Can we just get that? You know, can we literally, like, you know, Johnny Rico is Titus instead, and we see him from, you know, going through basic and all that kind of stuff and bonding and trials and tribulations, and then getting out and deployed and fighting, blah, blah, blah. Can we just have that, please?
Wounded severely by a Tyrannid Carnifex. With most others already dead around him, he prepared for the end. Yet by another twist of fate, he would now find himself reunited with his chapter. The Ultramarines were deployed here as part of a strike force to relieve the Death Watch. Despite the heavy losses and the sheer ferocity of the Tyrannids, the Imperium managed to slow the advance of High Fleet Leviathan, though the war still remains ongoing and the outcome uncertain. But it was at this time that the Ultramarines had answered the screaming astropathic cries for aid that had been received throughout the galaxy as the Fourth Tyrannic War emerged. The Imperium in this time was already struggling to hold back the tides of darkness. With the emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift,
it was like the worst time for the Tyranids to invade.
His Indomitus Crusade, and Ultramar itself only having recently emerged bloodied by the plague wars of the...
I think the Primaris Space Marines emergence was one of the only things that really started to kind of turn the tide at this time, if I'm remembering things correctly.
Death Guard. Yet among those of the Ultramarines' first company, who are well known as the Tyrannic Veterans, having survived the Tyrannic War in Ultramar and upon Macragge, promoted into the new First Company in the aftermath of that war, now as the Fourth Tyrannic War took hold, the First Company were headed at speed towards this new High Fleet, along with the First Captain Severus. They also carried with them Chief Librarian Varro Tigurius, one of the most powerful Psykers among all Astartes in the galaxy. But Tigurius is so powerful, he can operate as a battlefield commander, a psychic storm of annihilation when focused upon their enemies, and also an ethereal presence which can reach across the galaxy. And it would be he who detected the soul sign of the lost warrior they still knew as Demetrain Titus. The strike force launched from Tigurius's...
That's interesting. It's interesting, I would assume, because Titus has been touched by chaos, and I don't necessarily like if corrupted is the right word, because he's been corrupted, but he's been touched by chaos, that his essence now has some kind of like beacon in the warp, and so like astropaths, librarians, thing like that, I guess maybe if they're of a significant level of power would be able to detect that. I find that interesting.
His vessel hit the planet like a strike from the ancient gods, and with Thunderhawks deploying veteran squads of Tyrannic warfare, the Xenos were soon being readily exterminated. Tragically, they had arrived too late to save the planet, but not too late to save Titus, who was recovered and urgently placed into Apothecarian bays aboard the Righteous Fury, the same vessel that he had once served in alongside Captain Trajan. Titus was wounded so severely that it was quickly established he could not be saved in his current form as a firstborn Marine. The only thing that could be enacted were the so-called Calgarian rites, his transition to becoming a Primaris Marine. Like so many who had crossed the Primaris Rubicon before him, Titus emerged stronger and more resolute than ever before,
so Titus
not
became
least
a
to find
Primaris
himself in the company of his brothers within the Ultramarines once again. Even more so when he awoke to find himself bestowed with the rank of lieutenant, serving under Captain Sevastus Acheran of the Second Company. Not all, of course, were so pleased to see the immediate return of Titus. Many still had questions, suspicions even, about
I think this is where Space Marine 2 starts to come into play.
Had transpired. Yet the exploration within the mind and soul of Titus by Chief Librarian Tigurius should have immediately laid to rest any such concerns, for Tigurius found no sign of any corruption within him. His rank was reinstated by psychic communion with Marneus Calgar himself. The approval of the Chief Librarian and Chapter Master was an adamantine seal of approval that none should dare to question. So it was that Titus was reinstated as a member of the Ultramarines, having been dragged through the disgrace of inquisitorial suspicion, the humility of penance serving as a black shield, yet now finally emerging in the era that saw his Primarch Rabute Gilliman return to the Ultramarines and to lead the Imperium as Lord Commander. Titus was back where he belonged, to serve once more within the Second Company and to bring the unstoppable wrath of his chapter and the Emperor to all the enemies of the Imperium, as Titus remained under the ever-watchful eye of Marneus Calgar.
A theater of redemption. So I think here's where
In
we
the
start
era
probably
of
getting into
M41
Space Marine
and
2
humanity's great empire,
story and
the
lore.
galaxy stands shrouded in a stagnating fog of ignorance, pure confusion, and widespread misinformation. With the return of the Ultramarines Primarch Roboute Guilliman, after extensive study, he concluded that the destabilized state of the galaxy, most especially in the shadow of the emergence of the Great Rift Warp that split the Imperium in two, it was now impossible to determine an accurate course of time as it had been recorded to that point. It is believed that in the contemporary Imperium, because of this galactic scale of disruption, time flows erratically across different regions of the galaxy, leading to events occurring out of sync or even
because of how widespread the warp rift is, and because of it bleeding out into our reality, time in certain areas is different relative to how close they are to the warp's influence, I guess. Interesting.
even fully out of sequence. This destabilizing situation can
Which, I mean, we know that's the case even just with the Grey Knights, because like the Grey Knights home base was sent into the warp for over 1,000 years, you know, real time, I guess, for them to train and prepare. But for them, I don't think it was that long. It was only a few hundred years, I think, actually, of them preparing on their planet before they reemerged as the Grey Knights and took their place to do the thing they did.
even cause entire star systems to become temporarily isolated, or more generally galactic communications to just be very unreliable. For the Imperium of Man, this has had a profound impact. Coordination of military campaigns had already been historically difficult, but the situation now only further exacerbated confusion and disorder across the Imperium. This did nothing to improve the fact that humanity still faced relentless wars and constant incursions by Xenos heretics from within the Imperium itself, and of course the forces of chaos. The result of all this disruption is that many systems within the Imperium have scant or outdated information available, even for the most elite such as the Adeptus Astartes. Whilst it remains critical that those at the forefront of the Imperium's defences have access to such information, they will often find themselves operating with incomplete or wholly inaccurate intelligence. They may be dispatched to worlds with little knowledge of the current state of affairs, encountering unexpected threats, or finding entire planets lost to the warp or overrun by enemies long before their arrival. While historically, due to the nature of travel in the galaxy and the delays caused by Imperial bureaucracy, this may always have been true, the situation was now ever more pronounced. Quite obviously, any attempt to make efficient strategic planning became near impossible, and the lack of reliable information could lead to often disastrous outcomes. In the recent Tyrannic War, which saw Titus and his Death Watch crippled by the ferocity of the Tyranids, it was a prime example of how even where Astartes commanders are forced into relying on their instincts, adaptability, and the fragmented reports they receive, by the time they're able to enter a conflict and begin piecing together the true situation, this occurs only when they're already deep into the fray. So while Titus may have been accepted back into the Ultramarines chapter, he has much to prove among his battle brothers, and nothing short of exemplary action will suffice. The Residia system is currently deemed critical by the Imperium. The specific reasons for this, though, remain unknown. But with a strong Mechanicus presence, there is undoubtedly something deeper occurring here that has warranted such a heavy response.
Interesting. So I wonder if there's a standard template construct on there or something where they suspect there is one there that the Mechanicus are trying to get at all costs. Because, like, why else would they, a seemingly know-nothing world, be of strategic importance that way? From
the Imperium, one would like to imagine that with Karaku, a Death World Mechanicus research outpost, only having a population of a few 100 million, and its neighbour Demirium, a barrier world that is effectively uninhabited, the main reason for a strong response would be the population of the hive world Avarax within the Residia system, numbering some near 200 billion souls, not to mention its immense production output. In reality, if we know anything of the Imperium, it is far more likely that whatever has caused the designation of this system as being strategic value absolute,
Yeah.
it is most likely not the vast numbers of humans upon the world.
Yeah.
For while those among the Astartes would prioritize the salvation of such vast numbers of human lives if they could, the Mechanicus would most certainly not.
Yeah, for
In
sure.
the aftermath of
For
his
sure they
retrieval
wouldn't.
from Kadaku, it becomes evident for Titus that this is far from the end, and that his journey toward redemption begins here and now in the system of Residius. With their defenses crumbling and the populations falling into despair, Titus may have emerged from the Death Watch and returned to the Ultramarines, but his life as an Astartes has immediately presented him with yet another problem: strict adherence to the mission or the billions of citizens at stake upon Avarax. Perhaps he can achieve both.
Yeah.
Yet the Titus now is a very different man to the captain who waged a singular campaign against the Xenos Orcs and the Heretic Inquisitor and Chaos Astartes upon Graia. His risk-taking and somewhat cavalier attitude back then has been all but beaten out of him, and now he stands as a more pragmatic, objective individual with a clearer understanding of just what is at stake for the system and himself personally. In Space Marine 2, all of these details are delivered to us through not merely dialogue, but the personal actions, engagements between the characters, and the environment around them. And for the small preview I have seen, the storytelling unfolds with an attention to detail that demonstrates to us the change we see in Titus. Residius represents his best opportunity for redemption in the eyes of his brother Astartes. The system's dire situation offers an immediate chance to prove he has atoned for his past through securing a vital world for the Imperium.
He's been redeemed,
utilizing
and
his
he's worthy
experience
of
and
return.
skills developed in the Death Watch will be critical in his attempt to overcome the sheer scale of the challenges facing the system. A task that only a warrior of his caliber and his Primaris brothers can hope to secure in turning the tide against the Xenos horrors. For Titus's mission in Residius is not just a battle against the enemies of humanity, it is a deeply personal crusade, having been thrown back into the crucible of Xenos war so immediately after his return to the Ultramarines. One of the foremost issues in his mind is to reclaim his honour. Marneus Calgar had insisted that he be assigned the rank of lieutenant, even though Titus himself felt he was not deserving of such a rank and should have been more severely demoted. The defense of Residius is a critical point in his life, for the weight of responsibility placed upon Titus here is immense. To emerge victorious, he must inspire and command the brothers who accompany him and stand resolute against an almost incomprehensible scale of enemy. Such, though, is the life of an Astartes. Titus
Dude,
had
I'd love
at
to have
point
one of those
all
thunder
but
hammers,
accepted
bro.
his life as a black shield, and that he would
It's my favorite weapon to use in Dark Tide, man. Being one of the zealots or whatever, and having the thunder hammer, dude. Oh, it's so I love having the like special whatever they're called. I want to say infected, but they're not infected. But the charger dudes in Dark Tide or whatever that run at you and like slam you down and throw you, having them run at you and just one shot them with that Warhammer charged up. Ah, a few things are satisfying.
most likely die in anonymous service to the Emperor and the Imperium. Yet here on the ravaged world of Avarax, he sees a sliver of possibility to achieve redemption, to fully restore his reputation and finally bring peace to the ghosts of his past. As the story unfolds, it is not merely the fate of Residius at hand, but that of Titus's personal redemption.
Oh, I got some
For the two
Thousand
are
Suns here,
intertwined.
huh? With
Only in
Zinch.
victory will Titus be able to finally lay to rest the shame and suspicion that has shadowed him for so long, but dark forces are always working against him. This itself could be far more complex though than we may imagine, and the unfolding events of the campaign could still hold confusing aspects and suspicions that we are as yet still blind to. What are the Mechanicus doing within the Residius system? Why have they so recently resurrected activities here? And despite all the assessments and analysis of Titus himself, even by...
It is very interesting. I can't think of many things other than, you know, obviously a standard template construct or some kind of other technology that they deeply want to study what else would drive the Mechanicus to think that this strategic value of the planet is of absolute importance? If it's not for, resources, what else could it be?
Tigurius, an air of unease in the eyes of his brother Marines still hangs around him. His past haunts like a permanent stain upon his character, and one that must surely be finally laid to rest here, or otherwise condemn him to a life of unbearable suspicion and penance.
Questions remain, indeed.
In this section, we stray into the realm of the speculative, but still entirely grounded within the possibilities.
So I wonder, are Thousand Suns something that we end up fighting in Space Marine 2? Do we get into chaos stuff? Interesting.
Of both the lore and personal character of Titus. Primarily, what we are considering here is the long-term manipulation of individuals by the beings of the warp, specifically Tzeentch, the Great Changer of the Ways. Although I also wanted to speak to the character of Astartes and also the way in which they choose to approach things and why, specifically in this instance Titus and Leandros. From the previews we have seen so far in Space Marine 2, we know that Tzeentch will be a faction in the game.
Okay, so that's something that I didn't know. Awesome.
That they will play an important aspect in the campaign as it unfolds for Titus and his Marines.
I'm down with that. I'm down with that. I'm always interested in, fighting against chaos stuff.
This raises the larger questions. Will they remain disconnected from the personal journey of Titus, or will it have a deeper meaning and a narrative connotation? I can honestly say, I do not know. But it seems to me at least an interesting question that is worth exploring. Not least,
it would make sense that there would be some kind of chaos stuff that would go on with his story, as he seems to have at least a resistance to it and wanting to explore what that resistance is, what it means, why, et cetera, et cetera. Is he kind of like a latent psyker whose abilities have just not awakened? Is he something more along the lines of like an Astartes, but he's got properties of like a Sister of Silence, where somehow he's able to cancel out, or at least, again, be resistant to chaos, corruption, and influence through some kind of means? You know what I'm saying? Is that something that could be developed more to where he could have more of like a warp canceling thing? Maybe they got it enhanced more through his Primaris mutation, I guess, the process of becoming a Primaris Marine, whatever that process is. I think that's something that I haven't really gone over yet, what the actual process is that go from a Space Marine to a Primaris. But anyway, let's continue.
At least when we consider the words of Nemeroth, the Chaos Marine, at the heart of the conflict upon Graia, which saw Titus able to resist the powers of Nemeroth and even the warp itself. And this was something that Titus and his brothers were both confused and concerned by, which brings us of course to Leandros. Leandros was one of the newer members of Titus's command squad, and had demonstrated a trait often present in those who have successfully survived through to becoming an Astartes, that of a relative disconnect between the form they exist as now versus that of their prior humanity. Right. It's not uncommon for Space Marines to display a cold indifference to mortal humans, and a tendency to look at things from the bigger picture. At face value, it's very easy to feel a dislike towards Space Marines with this outlook. They seem very cold, emotionless, uncaring about individuals. But in actuality, becoming an Astartes is to see the galaxy entirely differently, because you no longer look at that small-scale personal level as most humans do. Such an outlook comes with the position of becoming an Astartes. It's also why many Inquisitors see actions at a scale far above even the planetary. True. Some Astartes are better at balancing this than others.
Well, and I mean, the Inquisitors also have, in general, a greater picture of what's going on. They're more informed and they know more what's going on, so they have a greater understanding of things, they have more information.
And it's something they may adjust from their experience over time. Some chapters of Space Marines are also known to display more empathy to standard humans than others. such as the Salamanders,
And even some of the
where other
Ultramarines to an
chapters
extent.
would see ordinary humans as little more than a means to an end, or just even numbers on a data slate. It's fair to say, though, that Leandros did not endear himself with his immediate character and his continual remonstrations with Titus. However, I've often spent time to consider, was this a fair assumption? Or was our view of Leandros more of an emotional reaction to someone who had seemingly become so disconnected from their humanity? And we'll talk about that more in a moment.
Okay.
But just to remind ourselves of that situation and the final events upon Graia. Titus had, by the later stages of that campaign, become determined to hunt down and kill the Chaos Sorcerer Nemeroth before he could harness the power of the Psychic Scourge, thereby fulfilling his plan to ascend to true demonhood. Having already shown a shocking resistance to the warp powers at play, Titus remained resolute despite the very obvious dangers. Leandros, though, vehemently disagrees with Titus about continuing on. He continually asserts the instructions of the Codex laid down by their Primarch. Titus appears to brush this off entirely, in fact some would say showing a shocking disregard for the Codex despite being an Ultramarine. He seems to actively shun its instructions. I think to this end, it is worth remembering just what the Codex Astartes is and when it was written. So, the Codex Astartes was not created merely to act as a guide for chapter organization, tactics, and the general conduct of Space Marines. It does do those things, but Robute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, created it as a vital tome which would incorporate all the lessons they had learned and in the shadow of the heresy, so that in the millennia to come, even beyond potentially his own life, the Astartes should never fall to darkness in the ways seen during the Horus heresy again, most notably resisting the corruption of chaos, because corruption from those of the warp was seen to be far more nuanced than any could have imagined. It did not take place in an acute form. It was not a pathogen or a virus that could easily be detected.
That's also something that could be implanted and not have any kind of outward effect for years, even decades. And then all of a sudden, you know, a chaos entity will enact whatever influence they've been holding on to.
It whispered in people's ears, it worked its way into their brain and their decisions, and it required a considerably strong framework to both resist and detect. So for this reason, among many others, in creating the Codex Astartes, Guilliman hoped to prevent the catastrophic events of the heresy from ever occurring again. And the arrival of the Codex coincided with one of the most significant events in the history of the Imperium, the dissolution of the Astartes legions, and the replacement with chapters.
Yep.
The rationalization was that no single force should ever be able to rebel on the scale of the traitor legions again, for the risk of such an occurrence to the Imperium and the Emperor was simply too great. So, returning to Leandros and Titus, although Leandros appears nagging and a bit of a Boy Scout, versus Titus basically just winging it and using his instincts and his experience, it's worth further analysis because this leads directly into the situation we're about to discover in Space Marine 2. As discussed earlier, Titus during the events on Graia was, up to that point, an exemplary member of the Ultramarines. He had seen great success and commendation, but no Astartes exists without a sense of pride, and despite any assertions to the contrary. So I think it's more than clear that Titus was somewhat overconfident and even arrogant in his attitude. He had only seen success during his time as an Astartes, and that had seen him ascend to the captain of the second company in relative...
True, he did essentially ascend the ranks pretty quickly from what he's saying. So there would be probably a sense of arrogance and accomplishment and a sense of, I know what I'm doing, when he might not.
...short order. So why should he not face the threats that become clear on Graia any differently, even though the warning signs were all there? Leandros was doing what he was expected to do as a member of the Ultramarines. He was giving his contrary opinion to his senior officer and reminding of the purposes in the Codex to enforce discipline and control within the Space Marine chapters, thereby reducing the risk of any individual or chapter falling to chaos.
Right.
The Codex emphasizes the importance of vigilance, purpose, and adherence to the Emperor's will, teaching Space Marines to be ever wary of the insidious influence of chaos. By codifying these principles in the Codex Astartes, Guilliman sought to maintain the strength, unity, and integrity of the Astartes, even absent to his presence, guiding them in their service to the Imperium of Man while safeguarding them against the corrupting temptations of chaos. So it is all the more surprising that Titus repeatedly tosses aside Leandros' concerns, pointing out that Titus has repeatedly shown this unusual resistance to the warp, and specifically ever since Nemeroth's invasion of Graia, something as
I can definitely see someone from an outside perspective seeing that as very suspect. You know what I'm saying? Like, this guy seems to be pushing aside the rules set about by his Primarch because he thinks, quote unquote, maybe he knows better, or he's not acting according to what the rules are saying too. After being in the presence of a chaos being who has potentially influenced them. You definitely see how the situation would be considered suspect, and even the people next to him might be questioning him. Very, I would think, you know, very reasonable.
Noted that even Nemeroth appears intrigued by Titus's resilience. And Titus continues to minimize these concerns even when they learn that the Inquisitor involved here was dead right from the start and had merely been puppeted by Nemeroth. The situation should have been significantly concerning, and Leandros doesn't go so far as to just outright accuse Titus of heresy. He is simply voicing his fears that whatever is behind the captain's resistance to the warp might inadvertently aid Nemeroth and compromise their mission. Now, to be completely clear, no matter how things eventually turned out, that is far from being unreasonable advice. And despite the ultimate conclusion to the situation on Graia, Titus exhibited here a clear arrogance to ignore the more pragmatic evaluation and adherence to the Codex as generally seen and expected of the Ultramarines. Titus dismisses Leandros' concerns and sets off to confront Nemeroth, determined to prevent the sorcerer's ascension. In short, Titus continues to demonstrate this
that can't be comfortable, that shit going up in your nose like that.
Personality. Leandros is deeply troubled, and with fair reason. These are exactly the kind of behaviours that Astartes who have fallen in the past tend to display, and that Space Marines are taught to be very cautious of. It's more than reasonable that Leandros becomes convinced that Titus may well have been corrupted, because often this can happen without an individual even being knowing aware of it. This, of course,
that's usually how it happens.
Leandros contacting the Inquisition. Meanwhile, Titus successfully defeats Nemeroth and seemingly destroys the power source, closing that warp rift, securing victory just as Imperial reinforcements arrive. Despite this success, Titus is taken into custody by Inquisitor Thrax due to Leandros' accusations, and as Titus is led away, Leandros confronts him, insisting that the Codex Astartes clearly marks him as a heretic, arguing that no one could resist the warp as Titus had without falling to corruption. Now, I hate to say it, but Leandros is 100% correct.
I mean, he is.
He always gets the bad rap on the backside.
I mean, like, you could say what you want about him and his character, I guess. He seems to be, I guess, in most people's eyes, from what this video is depicting, kind of a Boy Scout and a stickler, and maybe even kind of backstabbing us in some way, being that we're supposed to be Titus. But he's not wrong in the fact that Titus has been touched by chaos in some way, shape, or form, and you don't know, you can't know what that outcome's going to be. Even if it is just seemingly that he has some kind of resistance to it, like, you don't know what other kind of influence that's going to have down the line. Maybe he's already been possessed by a chaos entity that no one was aware of, and that is why he's resistant to it. You know what I mean? Like, who knows?
Side of this campaign, because of course Titus is the hero. But Leandros is fully justified in his actions here. In response, Titus asserts that the Codex Astartes is a guide that instills honour within the Ultramarines, but it is how each Space Marine chooses to live by those rules that truly defines them. Titus implies that in his rigid adherence to the Codex, Leandros has failed to grasp the deeper meaning and the true test of a Space Marine. The perspectives of both entirely questionable, Because while it may be true that in this specific instance Titus was correct, he himself is also missing something. On balance, there is no clear-cut definitive answer, and perhaps that is entirely the point.
Yeah.
Likely, Leandros needs to understand that to follow the Codex too rigidly in itself can invite disaster, something that has been historically demonstrated for the Ultramarines. But Titus also needed to more objectively understand that his flippancy
There's a middle ground, essentially, that needs to be met.
Placed him in his current predicament and could have led to the entire failure of the mission and worse. Of course, it is difficult to really see, given the situation they were in, what Titus could have done differently. Graia had to be defended. Nemeroth had to be defeated.
Again, I haven't played through this first Space Marine game yet, so I have no real idea or opinion of, you know, potentially what things could have done different as the story played out. So I guess once I do that, maybe at the end of that, I plan on streaming that maybe even later today as I'm recording of this, you know, later today, which by the time this video is released will be in the past. Timey-wimey YouTubiness. But yeah, maybe at the end of that, then I can go back and kind of give my opinion of that story and what I know of this and see what I think. But anyway, continue.
Whatever was occurring with Titus at the time was far less of a priority. However, that still does not discredit or dismiss the concerns of Leandros, which are fully justified. And that to me is the critical aspect to understand here. It's not about taking sides, it's understanding the complexity and difficulty for Astartes in trying to judge just what they should be doing in such a scenario. Titus implied in his passing statement that Leandros was incorrect in his actions, and that is where he himself was wrong.
Right.
As Nemeroth said, only a deep connection to the warp could explain Titus's ability to resist it, and the Chaos Sorcerer even questions if this means Titus will soon be joining them. He can feel and detect something in Titus at that time. Presumably, this is something he's seen before, and that's the huge red flag here. Despite
Right.
Titus surviving the interrogations of the Inquisitor and his subsequent time in the Death Watch, even the assessment of Chief Librarian Tigurius, there was something happening to him upon Graia that seemed to shake even the Chaos Sorcerer. Given that,
Which, I mean, yeah, that's got to be worse than something that would even, you know, cause a Chaos Warrior or you know, wizard, whatever, to give pause that he has some kind of been influenced in some way by the warp. That's got to be a bad sign.
that position, it's more than plausible that Leandros should raise a strong concern that required the involvement of both the Inquisition and the supporting Black Templars.
I mean, he definitely seems justified in doing so.
Because had he not, they likely would have executed him right there on the spot.
Right.
There are far too many examples to consider where we have seen individuals of a resilient constitution still manipulated by chaos against their will, entirely unknowing that it was taking place at all until the very last moment.
Yeah.
One of the most notable, which always comes to mind perhaps, is of course Inquisitor Sabathiel, who has seen more than her fair share of connection to the warp, even in her resurrection. But it is just one example of somebody who had a powerful belief in their own actions, a clarity of vision, who was 100% certain they were taking the right course and they knew what they were doing, only to find themselves become a pawn in the great game of the Chaos Gods. And of course, Sabathiel faced execution from the Grey Knights. The question regarding Titus and his ultimate status is an open one, and something that we may well learn more about through the Residius campaign. For while his own choices ultimately led to his penance within the Death Watch, the resistance he had to chaos was seemingly not of his own making. In the fullness of time, Titus's commitment to a path that, while not easy, could ultimately become far more important historically, could well be the path the Emperor laid out for Titus.
True.
I feel irrelevant.
True. It could also be a situation where maybe the Emperor has blessed him with this resistance because he's going to have a greater purpose in the long run. It could be something along those lines. I mean, there seems to be, in the present timeline, more and more influence by the Emperor on being Celestine, Rabute Gilliman, and Lionel Johnson's return, and them getting pieces of the Emperor's gear, the sword and the shield, and other such miracles beginning, Alfarius, I believe, being contacted by the Emperor as well in his dreams, etc. So maybe it is a blessing by the Emperor because he has a greater purpose. Who knows?
Adjacent example to put in here regarding the need to remain open to the interpretation of rules comes from the legendary Ultramarine Aeonid Thiel. Thiel was a sergeant during the heresy, and it had become part of the Ultramarines' identity to emulate their Primarch and Forge theoreticals to best protect and counter against all the enemies of mankind. Thiel, though, was judged to have gone too far when he theorized that they should also begin considering the possibility of having to combat Space Marines as well as Xenos. It's important to remember that in this time before the heresy broke out into the open, the concept of an Astartes fighting another was considered all but impossible.
Right.
And that even voicing this was tantamount to treason.
That's one of the things that I found most interesting in the Horus Rising book too, was just like how the situation on the Whisper Peaks where Yanis, I believe, was the Space Marine's name that got corrupted by Samus, became corrupted and started killing the other Space Marines. It was like one of the few times where Loken and any of the other Space Marines around them kind of hesitated because they just couldn't comprehend what was going on. One of their own was attacking other Space Marines and killing them. That's pretty interesting.
For his theoreticals, Thiel was marked for censure. Effectively, this was a disciplinary punishment, and his helmet was marked red for this reason. Yet at this time, the Word-Bearers' traitor Marines unleashed their infamous assault upon Kauth.
Right.
Thiel saved a chapter master from a demon incursion and would follow this with his theoretical that in a battle against their fellow Marines, the Ultramarines' greatest weakness was their staunch predictability, while the Word-Bearers' greatest advantage was the shock of their betrayal. The only way for the Ultramarines to regain the initiative would be to dispense with both. They should use unorthodox tactics and strategies to wage a brutal campaign against their former brethren with all ferocity, entirely uncharacteristic for the Ultramarines. During the Battle of Kauth, Guilliman ordered that all squad leaders accompanying him paint their helmets red because the Word-Bearers' attack had shredded the Ultramarines' normal command hierarchy and organization, and also communication was very unreliable.
That's kind of smart. So you essentially kind of equalize everyone so that you don't know who actually is an officer, so you can't target them specifically to disrupt the chain of command. Pretty smart move.
Guilliman wanted clear visual markers for the Ultramarines to follow. In the aftermath, Thiel's visionary heroism and theoretical prompted Guilliman to enshrine that red markings would now be a badge of honor instead of censure, something that the Ultramarines continue to carry in their aesthetics to the contemporary Imperium.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding that, and it's the reverse. I thought he was saying that they painted them red as a means of disguising, as a way of essentially making it so that the enemy couldn't understand who was in command. But maybe it's the opposite. I feel like it's what I said, though, but anyway.
10,000 years later, where all sergeants now wear the red helmet. Now, beside Aeonid Thiel being one of my favourite Space Marines in the history of 40k, what is the point of this story? Well, it seeks to illustrate that there is a need, as Titus demonstrated, to sometimes take a path that is not the easy choice,
the written path,
so long as the theoretical is sound. And that is something that their Primarch has always been clear on, to hear all sides no matter if they appear at face value problematic, because that is the genius of Guilliman, to remain open and objective to all considerations. This was the true failing of Leandros. He was too closed-minded, but Titus's failing was in not heeding the warnings of the Codex sufficiently. It was an impossible situation, and one which can only be concluded in this coming campaign, because with the presence of Tzeentch clearly seen to be operating in the Residius campaign, Titus needs to lay to rest the unanswered questions about this ability to resist the warp. Why the voices from the Immaterium were so keenly asking him Will you be joining us soon, brother? Was there puppetry at play here? There are very likely other unseen actors who will lead us into a final act that may resolve the question of Titus once and for all. The fundamental principle, though, is the danger of chaos. For chaos corruption can occur openly or inwardly, consciously or unconsciously, and even when it does not have a clear answer, one way or the other, the events upon Graia demonstrated how it can divide and break the bonds between loyal brothers of the Astartes, just as it did in the heresy. This is one of the most enduring, ever-present dangers that face Space Marines, and has not changed since the final end of that great war. The big question, of course, is, what are the sorcerers of the Thousand Suns doing here? What powers or ceremonies do they seek?
I would expect that is they're there probably to get whatever the same thing is that the Adeptus Mechanicus is after. I would assume there's some kind of artifact on this planet that both sides are trying to get. I would assume that's the case.
To unleash, and how critical will the strength of Titus be in unlocking whatever mysteries they seek to conceal? The Demetrain Titus of this campaign will not be that same individual we saw upon Graia. He is an entirely changed figure who has hopefully learned that the most challenging of personal journeys for an Astartes, and specifically for an Ultramarine, is to balance the strength of one's own individual instincts and experiences, and ego and pride, against those that are taught by the hallowed Codex Astartes. For in this campaign, Titus will be a distinctly more grounded individual, and with his new Ultima brothers by his side, Titus will bring his experience, insight, and tutelage to the new Primaris Marines of the Second Company, Chiron and Gadriel. Warhammer 40,000 is more than just a setting for games and novels. It's a living narrative that immerses us in the darkest of futures where humanity's survival exists on a knife edge. Simply put, there are so many ways to enjoy the setting of 40k that how we approach Space Marine 2 itself will be entirely individual. Many appreciated recently my long static gaze at the background of the game in the recent preview, but others wanted far superior gameplay than I could hope to provide. And then there are of course those who want nothing more than to just see and experience the new narrative of Titus explored. All of this highlights how 40k, with its deep lore, myriad factions, and relentless background of war, isn't just about experiencing a new game. It's about diving headfirst into the world of 40k in a way that feels both familiar yet also thrillingly new. Within the galaxy of M41, the stakes are incredibly high, and the lines between heroism and damnation often blurred. It's often said that there are no good guys or bad guys in 40k. A very debatable point, but one which hammers home the ethical weight placed upon the decisions facing the characters in such times. For myself, I always want to see a game that embodies the relentless, brutal nature of 40k, where sacrifices have to be made and the grim realities of war are ever present. This means not just engaging in epic battles against waves of Tyranids and other Xenos, but also feeling the weight of the lore, seeing the decay of ancient worlds, hearing the hymns and accounts of the Adeptus Mechanicus as they maintained their war machines, breaking through Xenos and heretic nests and shrines, crushing traitor Astartes, walking among those ordinary citizens of the Imperium and experiencing the desperate prayers of the Astra Militarum as they hold the line. For me, one of the most exciting aspects also for Space Marine 2 is the promise of the broad spectrum of missions which will take us through a host of environments, from claustrophobic hive-like structures and gothic crenellations to the choking jungles of a death world or the desolate...
Yeah, it does seem like we're going to be going to multiple worlds. It seems like we're going to get, a jungle death world as you're talking about, but it also seems like we might be getting into an Imperial hive world. And then who knows, maybe even going into a realm of chaos, maybe a planet that is enshrouded in chaos, and seeing what that's going to look like, which could be super dope to explore.
Wastelands of an Imperial cemetery world. All should help us to deepen our immersion, because I want Space Marine 2 to take us deep into the heart of the 40k setting. One of the most derided aspects of the first game was one of the most compelling for myself, that fundamental mechanical satisfaction of combat, and this was something that I can already feel in the new game from the previews, but the intensity is dialed up considerably. The visceral thrill of smashing through enemies with a chainsword, the cracking thud of bolter fire, and the sheer power of a well-timed jump pack landing as you crash into the enemies like a bolt of lightning. Space Marine 2 seems to be solidly delivering that sense of brutal, exhilarating action that made the first game very memorable. But now also the addition of cooperative gameplay, which promises extended replayability and the enjoyment of tailoring your own Marines with their custom aesthetics and stat tree builds. The ability though also to replay missions with different team compositions is greatly exciting, not least because it raises the prospect of being able to bring new people into the space of 40k and help walk them through their first steps onto the path of full immersion into the galaxy of M41, something I have found myself already inundated with invitations for. Space Marine 2 releases September 9, 2024 on PlayStation 5, Xbox and PC. But you can play up to 4 days early with the Gold or Ultra editions, which are available for pre-order now. Will Space Marine 2 live up to the hype? We will know soon enough. But many who I know who have previewed the game already and you have likely seen are feeling pretty confident that this could indeed be the ultimate 40k experience, because to play this game is awe-inspiring. It's a game which fulfills the desire to take on the role as one of the Emperor's angels and lead the fight to the Xenos and the heretics in the grim dark future, where we battle for the fate of billions and indeed all mankind. For as ever, there is only war.
Space Marine 2. Okay. Alright, well, there you have it. That was Space Marine 2 Titus Lore Deep Dive Warhammer 40k Lore and History. Good video. Good video as always by Luton09. As always, links be down below in the description to the original video without my commentary and reaction and to Luton's channel. Please do me a favor, click those links. If you enjoyed this video, go over there and give it a like. And if you're not already subscribed to Luton and you enjoy Warhammer 40k content, I would definitely recommend going over there, checking out his channel and seeing the kind of content he has. And if you enjoy Warhammer 40k content and you're not subbed to him already, I would highly recommend giving him a sub. He definitely deserves it. Makes a lot of great long format Warhammer videos like this. Very detailed and in-depth information on Warhammer. But yeah, great video covering kind of the story overall of Titus, which is really what I was wanting to watch this video for, to I guess prepare me for both my playthroughs of the Space Marine games. As I said, I haven't played through Space Marine 1 yet. Right now I am filming this on the 7th Saturday, and I'm going to have this video set to go Monday on the release of Space Marine 2. So hopefully over the weekend, I'm planning on turning on the stream and playing through Space Marine 1 to prepare for Monday when Space Marine 2 comes out, which I will then start. So hopefully I'll have those up, and if you guys want to join the streams, I hope you do. It'll be fun. I'll be here on the channel on YouTube as well as over on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/JohnMatrixTV. But yeah, great video on Titus and his background information, you know, the world he was raised on, how he became, you know, a Space Marine. He jumped through the ranks very quickly within 50 years, becoming a captain, I believe he said. And then through the events of the first Space Marine game, you know, it was evident that he has some kind of resistance to the warp and has been touched potentially by chaos in some way, and because of his actions on how he went through and did things through the first campaign, led him to become suspect. Was then willingly he, gave up and gave in to the Inquisition, and essentially for over 100 years was questioned by the Inquisition, etc., which apparently even the Inquisitor that arrested him had been corrupted by chaos. Who knows how long that was. But eventually he was released to become part of the Death Watch as a penance to his actions, and through various campaigns and fighting through that, when another Tyranid invasion, the Leviathan fleet, came and hit the various sectors of Ultramar, in the Death Watch, he, did many great things and essentially kind of redeemed himself, and was able to then return to the Ultramarines and fight alongside them, which then seems to lead into the lore of what's going to happen in the story of Space Marine 2. And so, hopefully the campaign will answer the questions of what does this warp resistance mean? What does this influence? Because even this, warp wizard sorcerer was very intrigued by what this could be and what it means. Is he already corrupted by chaos? Is it potentially a blessing from the Emperor to make him resistant? Does he have a higher purpose, that isn't known yet? Maybe these answers, we'll get those questions answered here coming up in Space Marine 2. So yeah, like I said, I am planning on playing Space Marine 1 over the weekend, which will have happened in the past, so that stream, and or if I'm not able to stream, I'll at least record me playing it and get that up on the channel, hopefully over the weekend. And then I definitely plan on streaming some Space Marine 2, playing through the campaign. And then I'm hoping, the co-op stuff, as well as the PvP is something that can keep me entertained and, be some fun entertainment. If the co-op stuff is interesting enough and enough people want to play it, we could see about doing some game nights, some community game nights. I'll hop on stream, and we can have a bunch of people just kind of rotate in, and we can do some co-op missions, or maybe even jump in and get some PvP lobbies going and just have fun, playing the game with and against each other. So if that's something that would interest you guys, let me know down in the comments if you want to see some community game nights, both for the co-op stuff as well as some PvP. So let me know, and I'll definitely see about planning some game nights for and around that. But thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider leaving a like and subs. That helps me and that helps the channel grow. If you would like to join us when we do these reactions live, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the original. My brain was going back to the spiel of the original channel, but there's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. Take a look at those if you would like to. If you've been around this channel for a while and you're considering taking your sport to the next channel, to the next level, take a look at those. You can get early access to videos, priority, and any kind of requests you might have to any reactions you might want me to do. There is a members Discord channel in our Discord that is open to everyone if you want to join the Discord, etc., etc. So just take a look, see if you want to do that. We'll greatly appreciate it if you did, but if not, I'm just very, appreciative of you guys coming and hanging out, and the support's been crazy on the channel lately. Got a lot of great growth, and I can't thank you guys enough for the continued support. So thank you guys very much. Hope you're having yourselves a wonderful day, and we'll see you guys on the next one.